Everyone expected Marc Marquez to fade. That was the story going into Saturday at Balaton Park. 1 month removed from surgery on a shoulder that has been rebuilt more times than anyone can comfortably count, on a tight, technical circuit built for the bikes around him, against a Pedro Acosta who had been fastest on Friday. The smart money said Marquez would qualify well, lead early, and then come apart in the closing laps as the arm gave out. He had said it himself. He ruled out any repeat of his 2025 double win here, and then he went out and did the one thing nobody had priced in. He won, lights to flag, and never looked like fading at all. So how does a man a month out of the operating theatre dismantle the rider who had owned the decisive Friday practice? And what does that tell you about everything we thought we knew about his season? Start with the part everyone agrees on, because it makes what followed harder to explain. This was Acosta's weekend. The young KTM rider topped Friday practice by 0.4 of a second at a circuit that hides his bike's biggest weakness. The straights are short, so the top speed deficit disappears. The layout is tight and technical, which is exactly how Acosta rides. For once, the machinery excuse was gone. Acosta had the fast bike on the right track. By every normal reading, this was the weekend the next generation was finally supposed to take one off the old guard. And it was Marquez who came into it carrying everything, 8th in the championship, more than 100 points behind the leader, Marco Bezzecchi, the worst title campaign of his Ducati career by a distance, and a body that had been opened up by surgeons 4 weeks earlier. He was not the favourite. He was the recovering patient who happened to still be on the entry list. Acosta sat 4th in the standings, comfortably ahead of him. On paper, the gap between these two had never looked wider, and it pointed the wrong way for Marquez. Then qualifying happened, and it should have ended the conversation. Early in Q2, on a freshly resurfaced and slippery turn 1, Marquez lost the front and crashed. Fabio Di Giannantonio went down at the same corner moments later, so this was not a wild error. It was a genuinely treacherous piece of track. But the optics were brutal. The man with the surgically repaired shoulder was on the floor, in the gravel, his fast lap apparently gone. This was the moment the whole "he's finished" narrative looked confirmed. The freeze frame every doubter had been waiting for. Acosta was over 0.4 clear of the field. Pole was his. The story was writing itself exactly the way everyone expected it to. And then Marquez tore it up. He did not sit in the gravel and accept that his lap was ruined, the way almost any other rider on the grid would have. He remounted, kept the engine running, dragged the bike back into the session, and on his final run produced a lap that took pole away from Acosta by 53 thousandths of a second. Read that again. A man who had been lying in the gravel minutes earlier, a month after shoulder surgery, beat the man who had been quickest on Friday to pole by less than the blink of an eye. There is a version of that crash that ends his Saturday. He turned it into the 76th pole of his Premier Class career instead. The rider who crashed took pole. The rider who had looked the class of the field on Friday lined up behind him. And the weekend that was supposed to be his quietly slipped away. And oh yeah, here is the detail that should have given Acosta his opening. Marquez was supposed to fade. Everyone knew it. The physical demands of a sprint, the repeated load through a damaged shoulder, the closing laps where the arm stops cooperating. The expectation across the paddock was that even from pole, Marquez would weaken late and Acosta would come back at him. Instead, the opposite happened. Marquez pulled out a lead of more than a second within a few laps. Then he doubled it. The body that had defined his entire season as a weakness simply refused to break on the one afternoon it was most expected to. From the front, he did not just win, he controlled it. Lights to flag, never threatened, never pressured, taking the flag by a clear 1.5 seconds while Acosta sat in second and never got close enough to attempt a move. At a circuit where overtaking is brutally hard, the man on pole was untouchable, and the man on pole was the one who had been on his back in the qualifying gravel a day before. It was his third sprint win of the season, after Goiânia and Jerez. Not the act of a fading champion, the act of a man who had finally had the thing holding him back surgically removed. Now let's be honest about the pushback, because it is already out there. The lap times were down on last year. Not by much, a few tenths off the 2025 pole record. But the people determined to shrink this result are leaning on exactly that. Conditions were different. The track had been resurfaced. The argument is that everyone was slower, so the win means less. But here is the problem with it. Marquez was not racing last year's grid, he was racing this one. And he beat all of it, from the gravel to pole to a lights to flag sprint win, 4 weeks after surgery. A stopwatch comparison across 2 different weekends does not change who crossed the line first on this one. And that is the flip. Everyone has spent this season reading the championship table and calling it decline. 8th, 100 points back, a faded force, a champion in the slow final act of his career. But the table measures a season of bad luck, crashes, and a body that was quietly sabotaging him in the exact moments that decide races. It does not measure the racer underneath, because the racer underneath never showed up on a result sheet that kept getting wrecked by circumstance. Take away the broken shoulder, give him one clean afternoon, and the answer arrives immediately and without ambiguity. He crashed in qualifying, took pole anyway, and then beat the fastest man on the grid lights to flag without ever looking troubled. That is not the profile of a rider in decline. That is a peak racer who has spent a season fighting his own body instead of the field. The decline was never the man. It was the injury, and the injury just got fixed. Then hold that against 2027. Pedro Acosta has agreed to join the factory Ducati team next season. Marquez's garage, Marquez's bike, Marquez's data on the other side of the box. This sprint was a preview of that partnership, and it was not close. On the one weekend, Acosta had every advantage, on his best track, against a Marquez who crashed in qualifying and sits 8th in the standings. Acosta still got beaten to pole and then beaten in the race. Now imagine that same fight with identical machinery, a healthy Marquez, and nowhere left to hide. So ask it one more time. How does a man a month out of surgery, 8th in the championship, beaten in the practice that set the grid, still win from pole on a track built for the other guy's bike? Maybe because the thing everyone called decline was never decline at all. Maybe it was just a screw in a shoulder and a season of rotten luck, hiding a racer who never actually went anywhere. The Grand Prix tomorrow is the next test. But Saturday already told you what you needed to know. Is Marc Marquez finished, or did we all just mistake an injury for the end? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video appearing on your screen right now.